guys, and welcome to another episode of Piano and Keyboard Artist, the channel where we discuss everything related to keyboard and musical instruments, pianos, synthesizers, and artist development with me, Vaughan George. And today's subject is a big one, once again, Depeche Mode. Today we're discussing Martin Gore and Dave Gahan, their vocals, past and present. And what I mean by that is, what I've personally noticed over the many years that I've been a Depeche Mode fan, and indeed many of you have commented on this as well, is how Dave and Martin's voices have changed. Now that's perfectly natural if you follow any artist, if you're a fan of any artist who's been around for a long time. For those artists who sort of started in the 70s or the 60s and are still going, and we're still blessed to have them, it is obvious that their voice, just as your body would change as you got old, your voice would change. I really want to delve deeply into this subject. So I want to delve into this and attack it from the perspective of as a producer, a fan, but also as a vocal coach. Also, with a video like this, guys, I'd like to keep it as general as possible. If you're a Depeche Mode fan, you're obviously watching this. Certain terminologies that I may use, singers will understand, and if you're not a singer, you probably won't understand it. But it is always my goal to sort of explain things in a way that are straightforward and easy to understand. You guys know well that I'm not musically trained, I'm not classically trained, I've taught myself. So when I explain things, it's done from a very sort of personal and practical perspective from the way I taught myself. And some people have actually said that sometimes makes my explaining easier for other people to understand, because I don't tend to explain in a very technical kind of way, because my brain just works in a very layman's kind of way. So guys, with that out the way, let's delve into the subject. It's Martin Gore and Dave Gahan, vocals past and present. Right, so to illustrate this, let's look into what type of singer is Dave Gahan and what type of singer is Martin Gore. Bringing it back to sort of like traditional musical classifications, from which started hundreds of years ago when we had choirs, and voices were categorized dependent on their range and their ability to sing high notes or low notes. So typically, if you were the deepest voices, typically male, and probably women in some cases, but typically male, you would be a bass. And then men who could sing slightly higher, but not as high as the highest male voices, would be classified as baritones. And most male voices fall within this baritone category. Within the baritone category, you get low baritones and high baritones. And then, of course, the highest male voices were classified as tenors. And then you got altos, which are typically female voices, mezzo-sopranos, and then sopranos, which are like the high-pitched voices. And these are the sort of 6 general classifications, but understand that there are sort of sub-classifications of this as well. I don't want to sort of get too technical, because as I say, I'm not too technical on this myself. And modern vocal coaching hasn't debunked a lot of these things. It recognizes these classifications, but a lot of these classifications were quite limiting, because I have, through personal experience, I've seen a student, through proper coaching, this guy believed he was a bass, and he didn't think he could ever hit high notes, and through proper breathing technique and learning how to abduct his vocal cords and several exercises, he was able to reach a top C, and he can actually sing like Axl Rose. He can hit those notes. So usually these classifications were based on your chest voice and your speaking voice. So the traditional way of classifying you was how high can you sing within your chest voice. And I don't want to get too deeply in this, guys, because this is another subject. The modern way of a lot of vocal coaches now is we don't necessarily classify your voice by how high you can sing, but almost by how low you can sing. And there are different schools of thoughts to this, and I don't want to open a completely different subject here. So in my opinion, Dave would be a baritone. And Martin, although I initially thought Martin might be a tenor, Martin, I believe, in a classical classification would be classified as a high baritone. And that makes sense, because if you listen to a lot of Martin's vocals, he can sing quite low, actually. I'm thinking of Take the Sweetest Perfection. When he goes, the sweetest perfection to call my own, the slightest correction couldn't finally home. But then, of course, on that demonstration, he would sing an octave higher on top of that in a thinner, sort of a lighter, more head voice. So it would be sweet as perfection to call my own. The slightest correction couldn't find the home. That is a typical Martin Gore technique where he sings really low, but then he also sings an octave higher. An octave meaning, 12 notes higher. So the low one being the sweetest perfection, and then the highest one, the sweetest perfection, and then putting those two together. And then his sort of lead vocal is kind of like it's a chest voice. It's almost like his speaking voice. It's what they would call in old school classifications as your real voice, your natural voice, not your head voice. Okay, now Dave's voice is very. We're not going to compare the two because, as I said, if you watch one of my previous videos where I talk about apples and bananas, you can't compare them because they're completely different. I think for this video, it is necessary to sort of illustrate how different their voices are, but then also at the same time illustrate how well they work together. Even within the laws of harmony, if you were singing a melody and someone was to sing a third above you, or a fifth, or a seventh, or whatever, and they were singing, and you were both singing perfectly in tune. Technically speaking, you should harmonize. It would be harmonically pleasing. However, some voices just sound better together. Something that just jumps to the top of my head now is like Simon and Garfunkel. I always felt that Dave Gahan and Martin Gore's voices, the way the frequencies and the tones and the harmonics of their voices, how those voices blended together was very, very pleasing. And you combine that with the great productions and the great songs, and you're onto a winning formula. So Martin's voice to me has a lot more color. Sometimes it's difficult when you're explaining emotional terms because sometimes we don't have the vocabulary to explain what we're trying to say. But when I talk about colors, he has many different sort of timbres and sounds to his voice. Think of the song Shouldn't Have Done That from the Broken Frame album, where he does that plans made in the nursery can change the course of history. He's got so many layers. So that's the melody, but then below that he goes plans made in the nursery. It's kind of like droning and deep. And then he's got the plans made in the nursery. Off the top of my head, I don't know if it's like 4-part harmony or sometimes 5-part, but it is very, very, very pleasing. And so yes, Gore's voice is very dynamic. His voice is used a lot, even in not only as a vocal instrument, but also if you listen to Depeche Mode songs, a lot of Gore's vocals will be sampled into a sampler and then played back at different pitches. And he just has a really, really beautiful voice. As far as male voices goes, it's really like angelic. So you've got this angelic, sweet, agile, it's very agile and woo. He can do a lot of that, all those nuances and frills. But then you've got Gahan, Dave. Dave's voice is more direct. It's more got that I'm taking a ride with my best friend. It's kind of more direct, and his voice is not as Alan Wilder even said in one of the autobiographies I read, where Alan Wilder said him and Martin back in the good old days they would go out on tour, and I think there was a story where they went to a piano bar and Alan would play songs, and there is a recording online, which I'll try and pull up for you, of Martin Gore and Alan Wilder in a piano bar, and they're singing Yesterday, and I remember in this autobiography Alan saying Martin does have a very good voice, and Alan felt that Martin's voice is better than Dave's. Okay, well, then again, it's not a comparison, but because the voices are so different, they do work well together. And there are many, many different examples which I want to run you through here. So when you've got Dave's direct sort of baritone, then now that I'm taking a ride with my best friend. So let's look at an example being Never Let Me Down Again. When we get to the part, we're flying high, we're watching the world pass us by. What's interesting is Dave Gahan is just singing the G. He's just staying on that note. So he's going, we're flying high, we're watching the world pass us by. He does bend it a bit, but he's fundamentally doing this. We're flying high, we're watching the world pass us by. Never want to come down, never want to put my feet back down on the ground. He's kind of doing that. And then Martin is actually doing the much more melodic part. So he's going, we're flying high, we're watching the world pass us by. Never want to come down, never want to put my feet back down on the ground. And he's using a real sort of like a head voice. And guys, if you're not a singer, head voice and chest voice, just very quickly, your chest voice would be the voice that I'm speaking to in at the moment. It's kind of like low, it's my natural voice. Head voice is a higher, like if you were to go, woo, you know, that sound in the head. So a head voice in layman's terms means you get more resonance from the head, and a chest voice is more resonance from the chest. So Martin does sing in chest voice, in his sort of natural voice, when he does songs like, most of his solo stuff, like I want somebody to share the rest of my life, share my innermost thoughts. Actually, with that's a little bit higher than a chest voice. You get chest voice and then you get head voice. But then there are different colors and variations in between. So to me, that's more like that's somewhere in between. And if you're a fellow music teacher or a singer, I'd love you to jump in on the subject. So that's more of a combination of what you'd call a mixed voice, which is a little bit chest and a little bit head with a little bit of head resonance. But probably and another one would be fragile. Like a baby in your arms. Head voice and resonance. Be gentle with me. So what gives Depeche Mode its iconically distinctive sound, besides the production and the songwriting, is Dave and Martin's voices, and the way the voices blend together. As I say, they are harmonically pleasing, and they sound brilliant together. I'm going to run you through a few practical examples just to sort of show you. Let's take, for instance, Behind the Wheel. That's a classic example of Dave just singing really low, very direct. My little girl, drive anywhere, do what you want. Not much reverb, just direct. I don't care tonight. And then Martin sings the octave higher, which is 12 notes higher, in a lighter voice. So when Dave's doing in the chest voice, Martin sings in a lighter head voice. He goes, my little girl, lots of reverb, drive anywhere, do what you want, I don't care tonight. That to me is iconic Depeche Mode. It's that, my little girl, it's really direct, and Martin going, my little girl, in a light head voice with a lot of reverb, vibrato. Martin does use a lot of vibrato, and that's one of his styles. You know, and of course that's the octave higher, but then there are other examples where Martin will sing a fifth or a seventh higher. I'm thinking of Photographic. A white house, a white room, the program of today. Interesting, on the record he goes, a white house, a white room, the program of today. That is an example of Dave using a more sort of breathy, a little bit of head voice there. But when he goes live, when he sings that song live, he really does it in a full-on chest voice where it's like, a white house, a white room, the program of today. He does that. And then Martin does a really sort of, the harmony on that is great that Martin does it. It's really sort of, it's kind of creepy and unsettling. Is it a fifth or a seventh higher? Anyway, Martin's going, a white house, a white room, the program of today. Lights on, switch on, your eyes are far away. See, it's lights. The map represents you and the tape is your voice. Follow all along you till you recognize the choice. Interesting how our ears work when we listen to music. Even though there's a lot of harmonies, it's funny how our ear is always sort of like drawn to the lead vocal. When I break down these songs into their parts like this, people are like, oh, I didn't even notice that. And it's interesting. I think if you're a musician, we tend to sort of listen to the different harmonies, whereas people who are not musicians tend to kind of hear it as a whole thing. And just for the record, that is actually the way music is meant to be heard. It's meant to be heard as a whole. You're not meant to sort of analyze it and pick it apart. Of course, if you're a producer, you do. There's a part of me that wishes I could hear music as I did before I became a musician and a producer, because now I hear it, I listen to it in a much more critical way, and I think that does take a lot of the enjoyment away sometimes. Another example where Dave would be singing direct baritone with Martin singing an octave higher would be in World in My Eyes. When it gets to the... Dave goes, that's all there is, nothing more than you can feel now, that's all there is. So Martin's singing the octave higher on this, once again in that light, airy head voice. That's all there is, nothing more than you can feel now, that's all there is. And Martin's voice, as I say, it's very agile, and he's got such fluidity. And one thing, it's always interesting to hear the demos, because the demos are most of the time they're sung by Martin because they're his songs, and it's interesting to hear the demos and then hear how they go on to make the finished record, and then of course hear Dave Gahan's interpretation. And one of the most interesting demos I heard recently, and I'll post a link to the description below, was Martin was doing a demo of I Feel You, and how that went on to become the Feel You I Know Now, or that we have now. It's interesting because Martin's is really, I feel you, your sun it shines. It's very light. I feel you within my mind. It's very light. Martin doesn't strain. He doesn't. But if you listen to the I Feel You on the records, I feel. He's really going for it. And yeah, Dave really developed incredible vocal power and character round about the Songs of Faith and Devotion period. Enjoy the silence where Dave goes, words like violence break the silence, come crashing into my little world. Then he comes to the chorus. All I ever wanted, all I ever needed is here in my arms. And then Martin only comes in the choruses, and he sings the octave higher, but in the light head voice. So Dave goes, all I ever wanted, all I ever needed, and then Martin, here in my arms. Then words are very unnecessary. Then he goes, they can only do harm. And that is typical Depeche Mode. The deep Dave baritone and the light Martin Gore head voice. Now, Martin does do a lot of that light singing as a backing vocalist, but then when he does his own songs, then he sort of utilizes more of his sort of like his natural chest voice. I'm thinking of songs like Is Simplicity Best or Simply the Easiest. I think he likes to sing quite low, and I'm sometimes not critical, but sometimes I'm curious to know why he chooses the keys he does for some of his songs. For instance, let's come back to The Sweetest Perfection. Now on the album, it starts in the C minor and he goes, the sweetest perfection to call my own, the slightest correction couldn't finally hone. It's beautiful. And I think the reason he sings it in that key is because later on in the song he does his harmony in an octave higher, which is sweetest perfection blended together with his low baritone. Oh, what a song. What was interesting, there was a concert I saw, I think it was in Germany. I found it on the internet, and it was quite badly recorded because it was an amateur camera. But it was interesting hearing Martin. He sang The Sweetest Perfection, and he went up just with an acoustic guitar. And what was interesting about that was he didn't sing it in the key which is on the album. For this live version, he actually sang it, I think it was a tone and a half higher here on the F sharp. It just had like an openness to it, which, dare I say, was missing on the album version. So I'll demonstrate that. So on the album version it was the sweetest perfection to call my own, the slightest correction. But now listen to this higher key that he played it in. He went, the sweetest perfection to call my own, the slightest correction couldn't finally home. See how it kind of opens up on the album version? The sweetest perfection to call my own. But in that higher key, the sweetest perfection to call my own, the slightest correction couldn't finally home. It really soars, and when it gets to the I stop and I stare too much, afraid that I care too much, and I hardly dare to touch, the fear that the spell may be broken. That key to me suits his voice better, but obviously there are reasons why he would have chosen that initial key for the studio version, the sweetest perfect, and there are many reasons to this, guys, and I'm not going to get into that. It's just, you know, when you're producing a record, you have to make the decision. What's the most important thing? Is it singing in a key that is best for my voice, or is it more about the atmosphere and the ambience of the song? And in a case, and because Depeche Mode is effectively a band not only about voice but also about the sound, all these things need to be considered. But that's another subject. We're starting right there, so remain on topic. Okay, so that's Martin, and one of the, you know, my favorite Martin Gore song of all times is the Fragile, like a baby in your arms. That to me is the perfect key for his voice. For instance, oh God, it's raining, but I'm not complaining. It's filling me up with new life. I mean, every voice has its optimum key, and Martin can actually sing quite pretty low and quite high as well. Also within that same key that I believe Martin's voice is best in is when he sings that I want you now, tomorrow won't do. There's a yearning inside and it's showing through. Reach out your hand and accept my love. We've waited for too long. Enough is enough. That to me is his optimum key. It's sort of round about E. Another observation I've noticed about Martin is a lot of the songs he sings today, they don't seem as effortless as what they were. A lot of that could also be down to the fact that Martin is a very different type of performer. If you look at him singing on Music for the Masses when he was doing that, he stands there with his hand on his hip and he's got that mafia hat and he's going, I heard it from my friends about the things you said. And if you watch him singing Question of Lust, he doesn't have much emotion on his face, and dare I say he almost looks a bit bored. I'm not saying he was, but if you look at the way Martin performs these days, and watch his face when he sings now, he's really animated, and when he plays guitar now, he's got that little bounce and he jumps. Look at the sort of earlier mode, sort of like up until sort of 101, he's quite sort of static and quite reserved on stage. He doesn't move much. I think sort of watch him from sort of Songs of Faith and Devotion, and I'm thinking of that part where walking in my shoes starts, and Martin's doing that thing, and he's like, Martin really sort of from the devotional period, and maybe it's all the drugs and stuff, but he really sort of came out of his shell. And if you look at him these days, and he is clean, I think he doesn't even drink anymore, but he is a much more sort of engaging and more animated and a more expressive performer. If you watch him sing now, he's got a lot of, watch his face when he sings now. From my first breath, he does all these facial expressions. Whereas when you look at his early 80s stuff, you know, watch him singing, it's a question of lust, and he sings the high notes and he goes, built up, crumbled to dust. He doesn't put any expression on his face, and it is because he puts all this expression on his face, and he's fundamentally a lot more animated these days on stage and more expressive. It almost looks like the songs are less effortless, and I don't know if you understand what I mean. Also, his voice has changed a lot. So if I think of Shake the Disease, whereas in the 80s, if he went, ooh, that kind of thing, whereas now these days he goes, ha. He's changing the vowel. So if you're a singer, you'll know all about what they call vowel modification. It's where you take a vowel, whether it be an A, and you would change it in a way that would make it easier to sing. So instead of going eh, you go ah, or you know, there are a lot of examples of singers that use vowels in a different way because it makes the vowel easier to sing. Another subject altogether, singers will always, sometimes, even if they've got lyrics in their songs, they will sometimes change the lyric to suit the way they can deliver the line, because sometimes ending a sentence with E doesn't have the power of ah, or oh. So sometimes R's and O's and O's can have more direct power. There are a lot of examples, and I'm not going to go through all of them, where he's changing a lot of the way he attacks vowels and stuff like that, obviously because his voice has changed. I've also noticed he's got a very Martin's always had this beautiful vibrato in his voice, but he does tend to really, I won't say overuse it, but especially in live shows now, he really pushes that. And I'm thinking of that song, From My First Breath. He really good. Listen to him on recent concerts. He really does that. For instance, he goes, I'm not going down on my knees begging you to adore me. He uses a lot of vibrato these days, like even in that song Going Backwards, he goes, you can track it on a satellite. And notice the line where he goes, nothing inside, nothing inside. He really pushes the vibrato these days. Not bad. His voice is changing. Now let's get on to Dave. Now, obviously Martin's voice has changed, but the change in Dave's voice has been a lot more noticeable and, dare I say, a little bit more abrupt. Not in a bad way. I remember watching if you guys have, I'm sure you've all watched the Exciter concert. If you ever get that the DVD, there's the special features, and they've got like Anton Corbijn, who directed the show, or did the photography and stuff. He was doing a behind-the-scenes interview, and he was asking them all kinds of questions. And I remember Dave clearly saying something. Dave's exact words were, "I can't sing, but I've got soul." I disagree with you, Dave. You definitely can sing, but I think what he's trying to illustrate there is Dave is not a flawless singer. I mean, he's not like, let's take Michael Bublé for instance, and no disrespect, Michael Bublé, but I'm not a fan. I'm just not into these flawless butterflies, having a good time, that kind of stuff. Not my kind of singer. I really like singers like Tom York and, Dave Gahan, and, people who've got, there's a bit of angst, and it doesn't have to be a perfect voice, but what is a perfect voice really? But to me, Dave's voice is perfect for Depeche Mode, just as Tom York's is perfect for Radiohead, and even Neil Tennant's voice is even perfect for Pet Shop Boys, although if he was to stand in front of Simon Cowell, Simon Cowell would say you can't sing, So anyway, completely different subject, back on topic. So I like to always categorize Dave's voice into 3 periods, whereas Martin's voice sort of still sounds like Martin's voice, it's just kind of, there are noticeable changes from what I've mentioned. But Dave really, if I take his his period from 81 when they started up until Music for the Masses and sort of like peaking on 101, that to me was the period where Dave had what I call the boyish voice. And when I say boyish, God, I don't mean like a Westlife boyish voice or a Boyzone voice. No disrespect to you if you're into that kind of music. But he had this kind of round, I'm taking a ride with my best friend. It was kind of like a round. It kind of had a, of course, a sound can't be round, guys, but you understand what I mean. Understand I'm speaking metaphorically here. It is kind of like a, I'm taking a ride with my best friend. And the reason I'm using that song as an example is because if you listen to Never Let Me Down, the way he sings it now, he tends to go, these days he goes, I'm taking a ride with my best. He's got this real sort of like rasp and a growl that he puts into his voice these days, which I think started in the sort of Songs of Faith and Devotion period. Up until, from the time they started in 81, up until sort of Music for the Masses, he had this sort of boyish voice, and I'm just thinking, I'm taking a ride, and Master and servant, there's a new game we like to play, you see. It's that kind of thing. When he came back with Devotional and he had all these tattoos and stuff, he lost weight, and God, he just found, he'd been living in New York, so he was influenced by a lot of rock, and this is why that was a big influence for Songs of Faith and Devotion, was to take it down a rock route, and that in conjunction with Martin writing in a really rocky sound, it was organically perfectly the way it just turned out. But Dave surfaced as a really different type of singer, because I think to me he's kind of boyish voice peaked round about the time of Violator. If I think of let me take you on a trip around the world and back, and that kind of roundish kind of sound. Whereas if you listen to him sing it now, he goes, let me take you on around the world. He kind of growls a lot more these days. Just randomly, I heard him singing Barrel of a Gun the other day, and if you listen to the record of Barrel of a Gun, it's like, what do you expect to be? It's for you. Whereas when he goes live now, he goes, what do you expect? What is it you want? He doesn't go, what is it you want? Like on the record. When he goes live, he goes, what is it you want? He kind of does that kind of growl. It's a very difficult song to perform live, by the way. Although I love it, I just find it doesn't always come across well live. Anyway, guys, as you can see, I'm all over the place with this, but I'm really on a roll, so just flow with me here. He had a certain type of voice from the early 80s up until Music for the Masses, and then it really peaked, I believe, with Violator, where he was just at the top of his game with that boyish voice. And then he comes back for Songs of Faith and Devotion, and he had found, as Martin said, he'd come into the studio sometime, and it didn't matter that he was off his face, because his vocals were brilliant. And I mean, Dave has said that he's what's it? There's a condemnation. Of course, he doesn't sing like that. He's like, condemnation. He really goes for it. And Dave has said that Condemnation is his best vocal ever. He has the Songs of Faith and Devotion period. He goes on tour. That was a killer tour. That was the tour that really broke the camel's back, and we lost Alan, and Dave indeed in 1996 he died. So I like to talk about Dave's voice being before and after death, and then when Dave was resurrected, he came back. His voice was different again. If you listen to him on the Ultra album, I know when he came back into Ultra, and when I heard Barrel of a Gun, I was like, wow, this is incredible. I really love the Ultra album. And the Ultra album proved to everyone, because when we talk about Alan a lot on this channel, the fact that he left, but a lot of people did say, oh God, this is the end of the band. And of course, when Ultra came out, it was like, hell no, they're still pretty much kicking ass. Of course, then after that, they released Exciter, and that's another story. The illustration is, guys, how Dave's voice had changed, and I found sort of round about the Ultra period is for the first time he started working with a vocal coach. Because remember Dave and Martin as well, they're self-trained, self-taught musicians, no formal training, and I think Dave started working with a vocal coach at this point, and it did help. And coming back to present time now, we have Dave Gahan, who has a very different voice. He still sounds like Dave. Some of the noticeable changes are something that I heard different in his voice for the first time was the first time I heard that song. It's only when I lose myself with someone else. he kind of incorporated this, it's only when I lose myself with someone else. He kind of adopted this kind of like, almost like a soulful, jazzy, kind of almost like a lounge singer in a way. If you listen to his song, Like All Soul Sisters and Soul Brothers, from the Exciter album, listen to that. I listened to that the first time and went, oh my God, Dave, wow. It's like, I'll be waiting in line. It's kind of like, he's singing like a lounge singer. And something very noticeable, what he does a lot these days, he uses that vocal fry a lot. A vocal fry is when you go, it's that kind of sound. I'm thinking of the song now, which one of you told me to listen to, from one of his solo albums, which is that Saw Something. What a song. When he goes, after the storm, and it reminds you of that Sister of Night, where the hunger descends. He's got a bit of that, he's got a lot of that intensity, and I think Martin and Dave are both more intense singers now, and a lot more sort of bluesy and rock and rolly sounding than they used to. Guys, as you see, I'm completely in the zone here, and a lot of these explanations are quite difficult to verbalize, because they are things I hear and see. So it's just me trying to put words to things that I hear. So there you have two singers of one of the best bands ever, in my opinion. Two very different types of singers, but the way they use their voices together is iconic, and that is probably the sound of Depeche Mode, even probably more than the synthesizers and stuff that they use. So in a nutshell, really, Martin's voice, it seemed to be more effortless back in the day. That's not to say he's a worse singer. He's definitely more experienced now. He just has a lot more intensity, the way he performs, the way his facial expressions, and he uses a lot more vibrato. From my first breath, he really is. We can track it on a satellite. He uses a lot of vibrato. Dave, these days, as I say, listen particularly to songs like Never Let Me Down Again, where he'd go, we're flying high. But whereas these days he goes, we're flying high. He kind of, songs like, let me take you on a trip around the world and back. Whereas these days it's more, let me take you on a trip. He does got more like a growl and more like, but I still love you, Dave. This is not a criticism. I'm not saying he's gotten worse. I'm just saying his voice has changed. It's different, and we still love Depeche Mode, and that is why we talk about them so exclusively on this channel. Guys, was this a long video? Did I go on a tangent there? You know something? I don't mind. I've been doing this. This is about the 16th video, and based on your feedback and your comments, I think there's a tremendous hunger for Depeche Mode, and there's even a desire for the tangents I go on. Some of you can't get enough. It's like this, any detail that anyone can speak about Depeche Mode, a lot of you want to hear. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got value from it. I'm probably gonna, when I get to edit it, go, oh my God, but I want to keep it as honest, as I said, like you're sitting in the room with me now. Many more subjects on Depeche Mode coming up. As I say, I'm going to be doing another video called Depeche Mode Live Sound Past and Present, and in that we're going to sort of interchangeably be talking about some of the subject we've talked about today, because as their live sound has changed and as their voices have changed, a lot of the songs have changed, and one of the noticeable things is that the songs, especially the songs that Dave sing, have been transposed into lower keys, just so he can hit the notes easier. Guys, there is so much more we can discuss and a lot more to come. I want to thank you once again for your support and belief in the channel. If you haven't subscribed, please do. And I will see you on the next video. Remember, there's a video every Wednesday and Sunday. I love you guys a lot, and thank you so much for your support. See you again.